My parents secretly gave my college fund to my older brother, then expected me to thank them for it. A 22 male found out my parents gave away my college fund to my older brother Ethan, 27 male, and somehow I ended up being treated like the selfish one for being upset about it. For most of my life, I grew up believing there was a clear plan for my future. My parents constantly talked about college like it was already handled. It wasn't framed as a question of if I would go, but where I would go. Every good grade I brought home was met with reminders that I was building towards something they had already prepared for me. Every conversation about my future eventually circled back to education and how they were making sure I would be ready for it. I never saw exact numbers. I never saw bank statements, but I was absolutely led to believe there was money set aside specifically for me. That belief quietly shaped a lot of my decisions growing up. I took school seriously not just because I wanted to, but because I thought I was preparing for something already secured. My older brother Ethan was the opposite in almost every way. He didn't care much for school, didn't follow structure well, and always seemed to be chasing whatever idea he was most excited about at the time. One month it was photography, then some online business idea, then crypto, then flipping furniture, then a delivery startup. Every few months it was something new, and every new thing came with the same level of confidence that this time it would finally work. What I didn't fully understand when I was younger was how often those experiments failed, and how often my parents stepped in afterward to fix the fallout. It wasn't dramatic or openly discussed. It was just quietly accepted that if Ethan needed help, my parents would provide it. Rent issues, debt, failed ventures, transportation problems. It didn't really matter what it was. There was always some kind of intervention. At the time, I didn't think much of it because I assumed that's what parents do. They help their kids when things go wrong. It didn't occur to me that there might be limits or trade-offs happening behind the scenes. By the time I got closer to college age, I had already internalized the idea that my path was planned out. I applied to a university that made sense financially based on what I believed I had available. It wasn't an elite school, but it had the program I wanted, and I was excited about it in a way I hadn't been excited about much else in my life. That excitement lasted right up until I started actually receiving financial breakdowns. The numbers didn't match what I expected. Even with scholarships and aid, there was still a gap that felt too large for what I thought I had been prepared for. That was the first moment I felt something was off, but I still assumed maybe I was misunderstanding something or missing some detail. So I sat my parents down and asked directly about the college fund. The reaction I got immediately told me something was wrong. There was a pause that went on too long. My dad looked at my mom avoided eye contact, and suddenly the conversation felt less like clarification and more like confession. When I pressed them on it, they eventually admitted that the fund wasn't really there anymore, at least not in the way I thought it was. Over the years, large portions of it had been used to help Ethan. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. Different emergencies, different situations, different explanations at the time, but all of it added up to the same result. The money I thought was set aside for my future had gradually been redirected elsewhere. What hit me hardest wasn't just that the money was gone, but that I had never been told. I asked them directly why they didn't say anything sooner, and the answers didn't really make sense. They said they didn't want me to worry. They said they hoped things would improve before I needed it. They said it wasn't something they wanted to burden me with while I was still in school. But none of that explained why I was only finding out at the exact moment I needed it. It felt like I had been making life decisions based on information that wasn't real, while everyone else quietly knew the truth. After that conversation, everything shifted. I wasn't just dealing with a financial problem. I was dealing with the realization that my entire plan had been built on something unstable. I had to rethink everything quickly. Loans became a necessity instead of an option. My choice of school suddenly mattered in a different way. I started working more just to keep up with the gap I hadn't planned for. It didn't ruin my life, but it changed the trajectory I thought I was on. A few weeks later, I ended up talking to Ethan about it. I wasn't angry going in. I genuinely wanted clarity. I wanted to understand if he even knew where the money had come from, or if this was all something happening above his awareness. But it became clear pretty quickly that he did know, at least in broad terms. He understood that my parents had helped him multiple times, and he understood that some of that support had come from resources originally meant for me. What surprised me more than anything was his reaction. There wasn't guilt. There wasn't even hesitation. It was more like inconvenience, like I was bringing up something he didn't want to deal with. He said things like I wasn't using it yet anyway, or that my parents chose to help him and that he didn't force anything. On a technical level, he wasn't wrong. He didn't force them, but emotionally it felt like he was completely detached from what that actually meant for me. Over time, I stopped bringing it up with him because every conversation ended the same way. I became the one causing tension whenever I mentioned it. My parents reacted similarly. Any attempt I made to revisit the situation turned into me being told I was ungrateful or that I was focusing too much on the past. The narrative slowly shifted from, your college fund was used elsewhere, to, you should be grateful for everything we've done for you overall. And while I don't deny they provided for me in many ways, it never really addressed the specific issue of what happened to the fund or why I wasn't told. Eventually, I just had to move forward. I went to a cheaper school than I originally planned, worked alongside my studies, and adjusted to a completely different version of college life than what I had imagined growing up. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't what I prepared for either. And in the background, there was always this quiet awareness that things could have been different if I had known earlier. The moment everything finally boiled over happened at a family dinner. I had mostly stopped talking about the fun by then because it never led anywhere productive. But during a conversation where my parents were being praised for how supportive they were of their children, my mom made a comment about always doing everything they could for both of us. Something about the way it was said just hit differently in that moment because it didn't match my experience of how things actually played out. So I asked a simple question. I asked if everyone there knew about the college fund. The room went silent almost immediately. My parents' expressions changed instantly. My brother looked uncomfortable. People started asking what I meant, so I explained it. I didn't yell. I didn't insult anyone. I just laid out what had happened as clearly as I could. That there had been a fund, that it had been used to help Ethan multiple times, that I had only found out when I was already applying for college. The reaction around the table shifted quickly from confusion to tension. Some people looked shocked, others looked uncertain, and a few immediately started asking my parents questions I had been asking for years. The rest of the dinner didn't really recover. Conversations broke apart, people left early, and the night ended in a way that felt completely disconnected from how it started. The next day, I started getting messages from different relatives with completely different takes on what happened. Some thought I was right to bring it up. Others thought I had embarrassed my parents unnecessarily. My parents themselves told me I should have kept it private and that I had turned a family moment into something uncomfortable. They said I should be grateful for everything they had done and not focus on one situation from the past. That was the part that stayed with me the most. Not the money itself, but the reaction afterward. Because in their view, the issue wasn't that I had been misled or left out of a major decision about my future. The issue was that I brought it up in front of other people. And after everything, I realized the core problem wasn't just what happened to the money. It was that we were no longer even arguing about the same version of reality.